What's going on, folks? Thanks for hitting that download button and checking out a brand new episode of Toys and Tech of the Trade, your one-stop shop for toys, tech, and talk with some assembly required. I'm your host, Rich, and if this is the first time you're checking out an episode, first of all, welcome. Second, a bit about what we do here. Toys and Tech of the Trade is an interview series where we sit down with content creators, entrepreneurs, and just awesome folks that are on our radar and discuss the gadgets, the gear, and the tech that they use to run their business, create content, and more importantly, be more productive. Now, when it comes to toys, we don't just relegate it to the usual action figures, Funko Pops, that stuff. We like to embrace toys in a more broad sense because everyone's definition of toys is different. For every one person that collects Marvel Legends and considers it their favorite toys, you might have somebody that collects bottle caps, kitchen knives, jet skis, motorcycles. Obviously, everyone's definition of toys is different, and we embrace that here wholeheartedly. And the best part about it is that by delving into these unique interests when it comes to toys, we get to learn a little bit more about our guests on a more personal level, and it breaks up a lot of the business talk that dominates a lot of the conversations on this podcast. With that intro out of the way, let's get into some housekeeping real quick and turn it over to this week's guest. So, first and foremost, we are releasing this episode shortly after Christmas. Christmas has been very interesting for a lot of reasons. Obviously, crazy Omicron stuff going on put a dent in a lot of holiday plans and a lot of things for my family. But overall, the holiday season has been very good. I am incredibly grateful that, knock on wood, my family's been safe and everybody's been healthy for the most part, minus my daughter getting some colds, which is what comes with the job when your 3-year-old starts school. But other than that, knock on wood, things have been great. So I am incredibly, incredibly grateful. With regards to the holidays, I hope those of you that celebrate the Christmas holiday had a very Merry Christmas and, looking forward to the last episode of Toys and Tech of the Trade for 2021, which is this one that you're listening to right now. And excited for 2022. We have lots of great guests. We have a couple of awesome shows debuting on the Rageworks Podcast Network and, hopefully some good job prospects for yours truly in the coming year. But I want to keep this short and sweet and be respectful of everyone's time, especially with the holidays. Getting somebody to listen to a podcast during the holidays is incredibly difficult. So with that said, I want to turn it over to this week's guest, which is someone who I've been trying to sit down with for quite some time. A fellow podcaster, content creator, and just an industry veteran who has some great stories and insights to share. But you know what? Don't take my word for it. Let's turn it over to this week's guest. My guest this week is podcast industry veteran and content creator, Jay Soderberg. We're going to break down not only his start in the industry, but the gadgets and gear he uses to create his content and a lot more. Jay, what's going on, my friend? How are you?
Hey, Rich. Doing well. Thanks for having me on.
I've been trying to get you on for quite some time. I'm glad that we got to sit down right before the holiday season to chop it up. And I want to start off with your origin story, so to speak, and how you got your start in podcasting. So let's start there.
It's a tale as old as time, I feel. I was one of those guys that happened to be at the right place at the right time. I was working at ESPN Radio, and I was doing production there. I had been a producer or associate producer on a number of different on-air shows, and there was just one day back in, I think it was 2004. It may have been 2005, but whatever. It was at the beginning of time in regards to podcasting. And the boss said, we need to do this thing called podcasting. And I looked at him and went, what's a podcast? And his response, I kid you not, was, we don't know either, but you're going to find out. And so I found out, I went, I did my research. I was listening to a lot of Adam Curry and Twit, as those were the two biggest stars at the time. I mean, there was no one at that particular point in time. And, I got it pretty quickly. I was like, you mean I can, and being at ESPN, I was like, you mean I can have my football without the baseball? I don't have to sit through basketball to get to the football scores. I can just do a football show. Um, and that was it. I became Pod Vader, dubbed so by the Fantasy Focus crew, and rest is history from there.
What was the early goings like for you, especially as the space was really starting to take shape back in 2000? And I ask because I remember when I started in 2006, people were like, "Oh, it's just an iPod thing. It's a passing fad." And here we are now in 2021 with going into 2022 in a multi-million dollar space, depending on the creator you're talking about. How has your perception on the industry changed, especially back then to now?
To me, a lot of people used to talk to me. I had such an advantage because I was at a multi-million dollar corporation, billion-dollar corporation at ESPN. And so I didn't, you know, make my bones, so to speak, from a grassroots standpoint. I did move to Blog Talk Radio. It was 2008. Man, I don't remember when I started at Blog Talk Radio. But in any case, I did leave and go to Blog Talk Radio, which wasn't a startup, but when I was joining, it was a start over. There was definitely an opinion about Blog Talk Radio that had evolved, that it was not a very nice place for content creators. And so I was brought in along with the general manager, the general architect at the time, Andy Toe, to really recreate what that business was. I think we did a pretty good job of it too, considering they got bought out by Spreaker, which became Vox Nest, which then got bought out by iHeart. So I think what we ended up doing there ended up working out quite well. But to me, it was the simple fact remains the same. You can have $1 billion and create a podcast that is trash compared to someone who has a few bucks. They've got a microphone that they can connect to their laptop. They've got Skype or whatever online connection tool that they're using, and make a much better product for way less money. And it's just about the passion, the connection to your audience, and the way that you go about building your community.
I think that that's one of the things that has evolved so much. I mean, backtracking a second to Blog Talk Radio at the time, I remember when I signed up for it, because when I was podcasting, I was like everyone else, USB headset microphone, recording into the void, hoping for the best. And the problem back then is it's not like now where people can connect with you on multiple social media platforms, different things. So you're kind of just speaking into the void and seeing what sticks. Blog Talk Radio created something very unique, and not enough people give it credit, that it allowed people to get that terrestrial radio, Howard Stern call-in dynamic that sometimes people need in order for shows to thrive. Obviously, now there's so many workarounds and so many things, especially in light of COVID, that allowed people to connect on a grander scale. Do you feel that particular platform didn't get enough kudos from the industry for doing that?
I think what Blog Talk Radio had was very unique. And when it started, it was originally intended, the founder of Blog Talk Radio originally just created it so that he could connect with his family over the internet instead of using a telephone or anything else. And from there, it was technology that could be expanded. And as you mentioned, you could do a live radio show on the internet with callers, and it was very easy to do. From there, when Andy Toe came on board, when I came on board, we had the task of taking a platform that had made it very easy for people to make live shows and convince them that podcasting, the download, was really where they wanted to focus their strengths. And of course, building it into a business, bringing on board dynamic ad insertion. We were one of the first companies. I don't want to say we were the first, but we we're definitely one of the first to really embrace dynamic ad insertion, which has swept the podcasting industry at this point, and really utilizing it at scale so that podcasters of any size could monetize their show with advertising using the tools that we were providing. So that was, there's a lot of things that happened in the early days of Blog Talk Radio, and then even in the later days of Blog Talk Radio, that have really set the foundation for the industry as a whole, to where the industry is right now. And that is where billion-dollar corporations have come in, sort of taken over the technology aspects of the business, if you will. I know there's still some grassroots stuff going on. Adam Curry has Podcasting 2.0 and is trying to keep podcasting as open as he possibly can. But let's face it, at this point, podcasting is a multi-million and soon to be billion-dollar industry. And those corporations aren't going to let go of that money.
No, definitely not. There's so much now. I feel like every week, I get a few different podcast newsletters, and I feel like every week it's, so-and-so is gobbling up such and such company. So-and-so is picking up XYZ podcast hosting company. And I understand that people are really just trying to, like you said, grab pieces to build their podcast arm. And while it's great because it's opening the door for really good creators to get platforms, I also feel that in a way it's mainstreaming it, making it seem that the barrier of entry is a lot easier than it should be, meaning everybody comes in with delusions of being the next Joe Rogan instead of just being the next, themselves and creating unique content. Do you feel that that's become something more prevalent over the last few years that you've been in the industry?
Oh, absolutely. And it's not just with, your everyday, next door neighbor. It's also with the famous people that will come in and think they can be the next Joe Rogan.
Oh,
it really comes down to this when it comes to creating a podcast that is going to be successful. One, be realistic. If you are the next door neighbor, the likelihood that you'll become the next Joe Rogan is very, very slim. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but the likelihood of that happening is extremely, extremely thin. That doesn't mean that you can't be successful. Give yourself a realistic goal, be real with yourself and with your reach, and understand the limitations that face you. If you are the next door neighbor that's looking to become the next Joe Rogan, well, what are the things that you need to do that? Well, you need to have access to a ginormous audience. And I mean, we're talking about Joe Rogan. He's the number one podcaster in all the land. So you need to have access to the entire universe of audience. Now, depending on which study you're going to read or what you're going to listen to, that's millions and millions of people.
Yep.
How are you going to get access to them? Well, you're going to need to have a budget, and you're going to have a huge budget with deep pockets to reach that many people. Advertising is not cheap. Yes, there are cheap options, but again, you're going to ultimately get what you pay for. So if you want to start building an audience, I'm not saying that you don't put money into advertising, but understand the limitations of what that money is going to do and how you're going to build your audience, and understand that it is going to be a slow process. There is no quick overnight fix. If there was, Rich, to be blunt, I probably wouldn't be talking to you right now. Be up on a mountain, enjoying my time away from humans, and just kicking back and relaxing with all my monies.
No,
But,
I think no, I'm glad that you summed it up in a very blunt sense. And the reason I say this is because I think that because people see all of these different successes, all of these different deals, people forget that podcasting still, even now, has a lot of not misinformation, but just a lot of conflicting information, meaning that there's still entities that are still viewing this and addressing it like if it were terrestrial radio. And I want to backtrack a bit to your time with ESPN. Was that one of those initial hurdles with regards to growth for ESPN at the time, like looking at this as a completely new animal versus repurposing the terrestrial radio approach?
So there were a couple of things there. Now, I obviously dealt a lot with original content. So we had a two-pronged plan when it came to podcasts, because ESPN definitely has repurposed radio content, but we were putting together original content as well, including Bill Simmons, who has now gone off to create The Ringer, the Fantasy Focus podcast, which still exists and has evolved into a whole online entity of its own. And of course, a podcast for every sport, and just put today at the end of it. And that was a podcast. But that was also the battle internally, trying to explain to other people that came from a broadcast background, you don't need to have this story highlighted as much as you think in this podcast, because one, people aren't going to get it everywhere else. You're doing the Michael Vick story every 5 minutes everywhere. We don't need to focus on Michael Vick in this podcast. If we are going to focus on Michael Vick, we're going to go way deep. We want somebody that's on the inside that's going to give us stuff that you're not featuring in the 5 minutes that you're doing it every 5 minutes. That was always the battle to get people to understand podcasting was something that was deeper, that allowed you to have a conversation that doesn't get interrupted by a commercial. You don't have to feed commercials. You don't have to feed the beast, so to speak, and make sure that, we hit a reset every 10 seconds to let people know what it was that they're listening to. People knew, they were searching it out, especially in the early days. And I think, to bring it back to today, understanding that it is hard work to make a podcast. It's not something that you can just turn a microphone on, create the content, and they will come. No, it's more than that. You have to have a passion for what it is that you're talking about. You have to display that passion wherever you're talking about it, and you have to shout it from the rooftops at every opportunity that you have, so that you can continue to build a community that's going to come into it. I was once quoted at a podcast conference saying, focus on your clubhouse. Make sure your clubhouse is as badass as it possibly can be. And then people will have no choice but to want to be knocking on your door to join your clubhouse. And that's really what it all comes down to.
Now, for you, especially with your background, when you started, how I want to kind of talk through what was the setup like back then to create podcasts when you were initially starting out? Like, what was your equipment consisting of back then versus how you approach podcasting now? What's changed? What do you still embrace and currently use?
So if I were to, if I'm going to be honest, at ESPN, that is definitely where I was fortunate, because I had a broadcast studio. So I had access to ISDN lines. I had a full studio set up with mixing board, computers, etc. That made the job super easy. When I left and was using Blog Talk Radio and was working at Blog Talk Radio made that connection fairly easy with just a laptop, a microphone, and any software that you can find available on the web for digital editing or even processing, for that matter. To that point, I don't think there has been that much of an evolution, other than the products that are available are that much better. Skype has definitely gotten better from the early days,
Yes,
where it is now. There's services like Riverside.fm, which makes the video aspect, a lot of people getting involved in video. That makes things a lot easier these days. And the choices that you have. I mean, I just mentioned Skype and Riverside, but there's Squadcast, there's Blue Jeans, there's Zoom if you want to. there's plenty of different connections that you can use online, and they vary in price, and some are even free. I still use uberconference.com for my connections with people. I'm not an audiophile, so I don't require my recordings to come in separate tracks. And Uber Conference gives me one high quality MP3 that I can use however I need to. And assuming that the person I'm speaking with has a strong internet connection and they connect me via that, I'm good to go. I still use, depending on which computer I'm using, I'll either use the original version of Cool Edit, because I've always believed that what you learn on is what you end up loving. And
Yep.
I learned how to do digital editing on Cool Edit. And I hated it when Adobe bought them out, but I can use Adobe Audition as well. And I tend to use those two programs for my digital editing, and all my processing. Both programs, I think, provide the right amount of processing, or has the right tools to provide the processing I need to make a good quality sounding file that can be distributed as a podcast.
What's your editing like? Versus when you first started? Are you more hyper focused now, like picking up crutch words, things like that, or do you try to keep it more natural, more organic? I know you were talking about a focus on real, free flowing conversation before.
I'm more of a natural guy. I'll pick up some especially when I do something like that.
Yep.
Those are easy to pick up. But if there's an occasional I'm okay with that. I am a little bit more hyper focused when I do the recording. I'm taking notes during my recording, marking down when I hear something that I think is going to be edited. And then the trick that I still think people are amazed at, that they haven't realized, is when you're taking down time codes and then you go to do your edits, do the edits backwards so you don't screw up your time codes. You don't have to keep doing math to fix the time codes. I think there's a lot of people that still take down time codes and then they edit from front to back instead of back to front. And it always amazes me that people haven't figured that out. It's like, no, make sure you do your edits backwards when you're taking down time codes.
I definitely agree. I mean, you mentioned so many great services, so many different things, and I feel like that's something that has really ushered in this increase, especially in light of the pandemic, when people were home and really focused on creating. So many services made so much of this accessible. I remember, in the early goings, like trying to get Skype to work and trying to get all the services in line to do something was always a challenge. And to your point now, there are so many services that have stepped up, and there's also been such a massive increase in video podcasting. I know that some people are kind of torn with regards to that. Do you believe that there's a place for video podcasting, meaning that there can be a content space that is completely independent of the audio podcasting format?
So the way that you just phrased that question, I think, is super important, and sort of where my concern lies, because I think a lot of people are getting involved in video podcasting, and the way that the information has been disseminated is that, well, if I'm not on YouTube, then I don't have a podcast, or I don't have a chance to grow my podcast. And misunderstanding that doesn't mean you have to have video on YouTube. YouTube is a giant search engine for sure. And there's clearly things about the algorithm on YouTube that is going to help your podcast get discovered by more audience than if it's out in the internet all by itself. But at the end of the day, understand that there's a reason why podcasting has touched so many people. And there's a reason why audio is the means of providing that message. And that's because you can't watch a video everywhere you go.
Right.
And I'm not going to buy people go onto YouTube and they click on a video and then they put their phone away and they just listen to the video. No. I'm not buying that whatsoever. And quite honestly, I think there needs to be a bigger dive into the analytics provided from YouTube, because You're not going to tell me that 5 billion people clicked on a video and all 5 billion watched 30 minutes of that video. There's no way in the world that happens.
I agree. I think it, and it's good we're kind of digging into that, because I remember one of the challenges when I was doing a podcast, and I still do it now. I put the audio file with a stationary image on YouTube, and the reason I did it was because a lot of the audience back then used to say, "Hey, your website is blocked at work," or, we can't have certain things playing, but YouTube is allowed. So I'd be able to have just the podcast on YouTube, and people were able to do that just because it wasn't locked down by work. And I still do it because, like you said, it's still a great search engine, but I don't go out of my way to record podcast video like I used to do back when I was hosting the show on Blog Talk Radio. It's a completely different dynamic. Now I just do it because it's just a matter of convenience, but I don't want to be, to your point, tethered to that, because at the end of the day, the main focus is being able to consume audio anywhere. You're not going to be able to stream a YouTube video while you're driving to work.
No. And just to be clear, I'm not against video podcasts either. I think that there's value there too. There clearly is. People wouldn't be putting radio shows on television over the past few years. That explosion that seems to continue. There's a reason why that's happening. People clearly want to watch those types of shows. But at the end of the day, don't forget the audio. The audio should be your priority. The video is sort of secondary. It's sort of a gift, if you will, to your audience. And as we've mentioned, there are plenty of services that make it very easy to create those videos, but also to take the audio portion of those videos to make into your audio only podcast for distribution everywhere.
All right. Now, before we move into what we like to call the hot seat, I did want to ask, in terms of the industry, what has been something that has changed in your opinion, in your thought process about the industry? Like, how do you feel about the industry now versus, say, a year or 2 years ago? What opinion has changed about the podcasting industry for you personally?
My opinion really hasn't changed as much as it's been strengthened. Obviously people have been talking about the death of radio for a very long time. And I certainly thought back when I was first introduced to podcasting that this was going to be the death of radio. I don't think radio is necessarily going away anytime soon, but I am encouraged by the amount of money that's being spent in podcasting, the services that we've continuously mentioned, improving their products for podcasters, the number of companies that are getting involved in podcasting. Podcasting is definitely going to become a major media that will overcome radio at some point. I just believe the on-demand nature and culture that is developing in the world these days, podcasting will become the audio feature of choice over radio at some point. And really, I think the tipping point that we're waiting for is figuring out the legalities of commercially licensed music and how can we make that available in a podcast. Right now, the amount of money that it would take to make that available is beyond ridiculous. Not even the biggest and deepest of pockets of companies want to tread in that particular field. But as soon as we make that something that is commercially viable, that will be the tipping point that we're all waiting for.
Yeah, I can agree with you. I think that especially now, when I'd like to say we've become an a la carte culture, especially because you get cable, you get 800 channels. Out of the 800, you only watch 10 of them, and you're like, wow, do I really want to pay for this 790 other channels? And I think that podcasting fills that void so well, especially when compared to radio, because like you said, you have ad breaks and resets and all those things that kind of detract from what you're trying to listen to. Like, drive time radio used to be one of the highlights of my day, especially when I was on a constant commute. And over time, I just got tired of the recycling of the bits or the overuse of ad reads and sponsors. Like, it just took away so much from what I was trying to get, that when podcasting really took hold, I had a podcast for every interest I had that I could just play at the drop of a hat. And it was it was very liberating. And I think more and more people are embracing it that same way. Now, do you feel that Spotify has helped lead that forward because it's such an easily accessible medium versus, say, a traditional podcasting app?
It would be wrong of me to say that it hasn't. It's clearly made an impact for people that weren't going to get into podcasting before. Apple's still number one. Most people are still listening to podcasts via Apple and via the Apple Podcast app. There's research that's showing that more and more people say that Spotify is their number one app of choice. I think Spotify just makes it easier for people with whatever type of phone they have to access their podcasts. And I think that's really the difference. If Apple were to make their podcast app available on an Android device, I think Apple might still be the king because most people still equate Apple as being podcasts.
Yep.
Spotify says that they are podcasts, but people don't equate Spotify with podcasts yet.
Yeah, I think I remember, especially in the early goings, one of the things I heard the most was, podcast iPod was just it just it was synonymous. It was something that was easily mentioned. So I think that argument definitely holds weight. Now, do you see that happening? Do you see Apple pulling that trigger and putting that stamp on their app and using it on something like Android?
Well, I see many people who are much smarter than me in this industry mentioning that. People like James Cridlin continually predicting that that's going to happen. To me, it just makes sense. I'm a guy that looks at things that make logical common sense, and to me, that just makes logical common sense. So why Apple has delayed doing this, I don't know. I don't know what their business model is currently for podcasting, but now that they're in the subscription business, my guess is they now have a monetary reason to get behind it, and making their subscriptions available on an Android device just makes logical common sense.
Gotcha. Well, that's a good segue into our hot seat segment, which is a series of rapid fire questions based on some of the stuff we talk about industry and just a few other things as well. So, first and foremost, what are 3 mobile apps you cannot live without?
3 mobile apps that I can't live without. Well, we mentioned 2 of them, Apple and Spotify.
Mm-hmm.
A third, let me look at my phone right now and see which one that I go to the most. Does Outlook count?
Absolutely. Oh, it definitely does. I mean, my wife started receiving work emails on her phone, and now Outlook. I hear more dings for Outlook on a daily basis than any other notification in my house.
Oh, here's the trick to that. You can't have the notification on.
I agree.
You gotta keep it off. But then when you notice that the counter has moved from 6,672 to 6,700, then I better check what's going on my email.
There you go. I know you had mentioned your preference about editing with Cool Edit or Audition. Do you feel that both of those are what I'm saying? Let me rephrase that. Do you feel that those 2 softwares versus like Audacity and everything else are battle tested, or is it one of those things where once you learn one, you can kind of interchange skills towards other ones? Meaning, like if you go from Audition to Audacity to, let's say, Hindenburg Journalist, do you feel that there's commonalities between them to make that adjustment?
There are commonalities among any digital audio workstation. I've always been one that you end up loving what you learn on, and because you're going to become most comfortable with that particular program, you're going to know the ins and outs of it. I've had Hindenburg, and by the way, I shout from the rooftops how awesome Hindenburg is as a digital audio editor.
Oh yeah!
If you've never edited audio ever, and you're looking for something to start on, start with Hindenburg. It's awesome, and you'll thank me for it later, because quite frankly, it's fantastic. The reason why I haven't switched my editing to Hindenburg isn't because I don't think it's awesome. I love it. It's because I know that my learning curve to transform everything that I've learned on all the other digital editing software to make to get my speed back up to where it's going to be, it's going to take me a little bit. There is definitely a curve when you switch from one program to another. The basics are all obviously still the same. It's just a matter of learning and feeling that program so that you feel like you're one with the program when you're editing the audio. So that's the only reason why I haven't committed to making the switch, is because I just don't want to take that 2 steps back to get ahead of the game.
Gotcha. What's one website you recommend to people often?
Well, I mentioned uberconference.com earlier. I love the fact that not a lot of people use it. So I don't have to worry too much about my audio getting screwed up, because that's, quite frankly, what ends up happening with a lot of the popular software that's out there. Any of the other places that provide a recording of your online audio, the reason oftentimes why your recordings are getting screwed up is because there's too much bandwidth to their service. And the more and more people that end up using that particular service, the more and more likely it is that your audio is going to come out kablooey. So the fact that not a lot of people use uberconference.com for their podcasts makes it the perfect place to do it, your recordings.
Nice. What was the last book you read?
I don't read. Sorry.
Really?
I really don't. It's, I listen. I obviously listen to a lot of podcasts. I watch a lot of television, probably too much television. But I'm not big into reading. If I'm reading anything, it's sports articles online.
There you go. Well, you know what? That takes me into another question. What was the last TV show you watched?
I watched, not counting Monday Night Football, I watched the latest episode of Hawkeye. Not the finale, but the one right before the finale, with my son.
What'd you think?
I love it. All the Marvel shows, all the things that they're doing on that Disney Plus app are phenomenal. And we are counting down the days for the Book of Boba Fett. And we are also counting down the days for Cobra Kai, which, that's been the biggest thrill for me as a father, is embracing some of this content with my son, who wasn't introduced to the original content.
Yep.
And now, and now there's a new generation being born, and getting to share some of that, and the thrill of discovering that content that touched you. I mean, I go by Pod Vader, when it was first introduced to me, it was meant as a joke, but I mean, I was a big Star Wars fan anyway, so I was like, go ahead and call me Pod Vader. I'm a badass dark Sith Lord. Yep. Ha ha.
Yeah, I think as a father myself, my daughter is 3. I think that's made me appreciate so much of the stuff I grew up with. We got to build our first Voltron together. I had some they reissued a lot of the Voltron stuff, and I bought it, and I had it all in package, and I was like, let me open it. What the hell? and let's build it. And she was so into it. And then she wanted to watch the cartoons. And I think that's something that, to your point, I can definitely get behind, especially if you're passionate about Star Wars and all this stuff. And obviously there are people that they don't like the quote unquote changes. And I try to tell them listen, it's not for you anymore. It is, and it isn't. Boba Fett, people forget it. It's funny. I'm like, Boba Fett has this mystique of being this badass dude. He died in 3 seconds.
Right.
And now all of a sudden they're making him this badass dude, and a new generation of Star Wars fans are going to become a fan of his character strictly off of the show, not knowing that he fell into this sand pit and has been there forever.
That's going to be the hardest point for them when they're introduced to Boba Fett through the show.
Yep.
And then they go back and they watch the movies and they're like, what is wrong with him?
Yep.
Why is he so terrible?
Yep. It's amazing. It's amazing how that how that all ties together, especially now, like when they were going to bring him back and people started like really going crazy for it. And I was like, listen, man, you forget this guy essentially died by accident.
It's a good point.
It's crazy. What was something you purchased recently that was less than $100 that made your life easier or more enjoyable?
Oh boy. Not counting the candy bars that I eat too many of. What is a device that was less than $100 that has made my life more enjoyable?
Yeah, anything that you purchased.
Oh man, that's a difficult question. There's not a lot of things you can buy these days for less than $100.
There really is not. It's amazing how many people sometimes are like, I'm a little stuck.
Well, I can tell you this. I'm still old school in that I still use pen and paper to write notes. So oftentimes, especially this time of year, I'm getting discount notebooks from all the stationery stores, so that I can keep all my notes when I'm writing out notes. I'm still, I still haven't figured out how to take notes while I'm on a Zoom call via a Google Doc. Like,
nope, can't do it. I mean,
do it.
You want to laugh? I have an iPad Pro, and I write with the pencil in the notes app on the iPad Pro. So I'm like, oh, I got, my wife is like, look, you have a $1,000 piece of paper on your desk that you're writing on. It's hilarious.
Yeah,
it's true.
Yeah.
But obviously, besides your phone, your computer, everything else, do you have another favorite piece of technology you like to use in your day to day?
People will often curse about their earbuds, but quite frankly, earbuds have changed my life. I just find that they're so much portable. Now, my one problem with them is they die way too quickly. And by die way too quickly, I mean, I'm listening to podcasts almost all day long. So I know when I get to that 3-hour mark, listening to No Agenda with Adam Curry and John C. Dvorak, that those earbuds are going to be on their last leg at the end of the podcast. And then I got to put them back in the pod and recharge them. And that's a pain in the butt. But honestly, like if my wife hadn't bought me earbuds, I think she bought them for me last year. I don't know where I'd be without them.
There you go. I know, we've talked about tech, you mentioned you're a Star Wars fan, gotta talk some toys. What was your favorite toy or collectible from your childhood?
Oh, I had the AT-AT.
Oh man,
that thing, and I still have it. I wish it was in mint condition. Unfortunately, I put that thing through the ringer as a kid. I beat
nice.
the heck out of that thing. But yeah, that was definitely one of my favorites. Stomping on all my Star Wars figures. I wish I still had all my Star Wars figures. I only have a few.
Still worth money though. Can't knock it.
Well, they're in the attic in a box somewhere.
Do you share any hobbies with your kids?
Yeah, my daughter really likes artwork, so I'll draw and paint with her from time to time. My son is big into sports, just like me, and so I coached his football team for a while, and we still make time every weekend to sit down and watch the Patriots on Sundays. So yeah, I spend tons of time with my kids. I mean, quite honestly, who am I going to spend a lot of time with anyway?
Yeah, I know but I also feel that, and it's funny you phrase it that way. I feel that a lot of people have gotten closer with their kids because obviously when you're working and school and everything else, there is a bit of a disconnect. I mean, that's one of the things I've enjoyed, like, even though I haven't been working, I've enjoyed the fact that I can pick my daughter up from school and make her a snack and we can watch Justice League together and, hear about her day and all this stuff versus, somebody will pick her up from school. I'll get home at 5-6 o'clock and then got to decompress, etc. So I feel to some extent, like, again, not the best of times with a lot of things, but in terms of family and togetherness, I feel that some people have benefited greatly.
Yeah, I think, if there is a silver lining to COVID, and God knows there aren't very many of them, uh, that is definitely one. The closer knit family is definitely something that I embrace, and will probably always embrace. And as my son is in his senior year of high school and he's getting ready for college, and my wife cries already
Oh,
knowing
geez.
that he's leaving the house. um, you know, I'm also at that aspect of my life where it's like, holy crap, I've already raised two adults. I'm old.
Yeah, those are some sobering realities. I say to a friend of mine, hey, we're in the age now where we get phone calls of like, which sounds grim, but it's like we get phone calls about like friends actually like passing away, like from
Mm.
things. It's not like, oh, a friend had an accident, he passed away. Like now it's like, oh, so and so got sick and it's crazy because it becomes more frequent and then you start kind of looking at your own mortality, which is so weird.
It really is. It really is. I just want to go back to the fantasy world of the Book of Boba Fett.
That's it. Simpler times and simpler passions.
Exactly.
What's a non-negotiable for you when it comes to business?
Non-negotiable. I'm a big believer in honesty. And I always tend to, sometimes to my detriment, play with my cards wide open. And when I feel like you're holding back, when you're not being 100% truthful with me, or I find out that you haven't been 100% truthful with me, um, that definitely ends up being a blocker. I won't continue to deal with you. It's like, okay, you fooled me once. That's shame on me, and it will never happen again.
Gotcha. Makes perfect sense. Where where do you see the podcasting industry a year from now?
Richer. Um, there's a lot more ad dollars coming in. As I mentioned before, the embracement of dynamic ad insertion is really gone. Back when I was first pitching it with Blog Talk Radio, there was a lot of fervor against it. Now I feel like the pendulum has swung in the complete opposite direction. And with dynamic ad insertion, there's a lot more money that will be spread out in this space. So I see the industry continuing to grow and continuing to get richer.
Nice. Before we wrap things up, two last questions. What did you want to be when you were a kid?
I thought when I was going to college, I was going to become a lawyer and save the world from all the nasty, nasty people out there. And when I went to my first college class on law, and the professor grabbed, a book the size of an encyclopedia and put it on his desk and went, "This is full of a lot of the constitutional laws that have been passed since the early 1800s. You will all have to memorize this book if you
Oh
want to
man.
be a successful lawyer." And I went, "Yeah, that's not me. Let me go do some radio." So yeah, I always I thought I was going to be a lawyer, and then I thought I was going to be some big shot radio star. And it's funny how neither of those two things worked out, but at the end of the day, the position I'm in now, it's sort of a combination of both. So
Now, one thing with that to bring things full circle is, before we wrap things up, we call it reach one, teach one. It's a nice way to give our listeners some actionable content. You said about you wanted to be a lawyer and you wanted to, be a radio star, and now you've mixed them both. What's a piece of advice you'd give to young podcast starters, kids coming out of high school that want to start? What's a piece of actionable advice you'd give them if they were getting the podcast itch?
you don't need to go to school to do this for a living. You just need to sit down and get the reps in and listen to podcasts like these, watch YouTube videos that cover some of the same topics. But if you do go to school, make sure that you're not only taking audio courses, but you're also taking video courses. And then the biggest thing I would say, especially as a podcaster, is make sure you're taking some marketing courses. That seems to be the one aspect. A lot of people can turn on a microphone and talk, and they can be very successful at it, but they don't know how to sell that to someone. So make sure you're doing your due diligence and not only focusing on the content creation, but how do you market that creation once it's done?
Outstanding. That is a great way to wrap things up. Jay, thank you for taking the time to share the toys and tech of your trade. And of course, happy holidays to you and your family.
Same to you, Rich. Thanks for having me on.
I hope you folks enjoyed my conversation with Jay. Jay is just an amazing, amazing human being, a great content creator, an amazing, amazing force in the podcasting space. Somebody who's been in the trenches from the early goings and continues to bring value to the space now, whether it's helping brands to grow their podcast presence or bringing his podcast experience to the forefront and paying it forward in all of the different communities that he's a part of. Jay is an A+ human being, and I'm very, very glad that I got to chop it up with him, especially for our last episode of 2021. With that said, all of the stuff that we discussed in this week's episode will be in the show notes. As always, some of those items may contain affiliate links, which if you click, will receive a small commission, which goes towards making this podcast and everything that comes to you from RageWorks better. Whether it's a better experience on our website, better videos on our YouTube channel, or just better audio from our podcast, whether it's my own or some of the podcasts on the RageWorks Podcast Network, those affiliate dollars go right back into the business. So using those links really does help us out. And most importantly, it's at no additional cost for you. Of course, we'll make sure to include links to connect with Jay and keep up with all of Jay's work in the show notes as well. Last but not least, if you want to keep up with RageWorks, you can find us on your favorite social media platforms. And if you want to get RageWorks updates in your inbox, make sure to sign up for the RageWorks newsletter. We try to send something out once a week or every 2 weeks, nothing spammy, just to keep you up to date with everything RageWorks, whether it's contests, which we did quite a few of them this past holiday season, and even some stuff that we're going to do at the beginning of the year. If you are a newsletter subscriber, you will get the updates first before it goes to social and everywhere else. So definitely, if you want to get RageWorks updates in your inbox, make sure to sign up. Links for the newsletter will be in the show notes. Last but not least, if you'd like to be a guest on a future episode of Toys and Tech of the Trade, you can email me, rich@rageworks.net, or head over to the website, rageworksnetwork.com, and fill out the contact form. Let us know whether it's for our show or one of the other shows on the network, and we'll be in touch to set something up for a future guest appearance. And of course, as always, if this show, when this podcast was informative and entertaining and brought you value, please take a moment and give us a rating on iTunes or Spotify, which now has ratings. We would really, really appreciate it. Every little bit of social proof allows us to get bigger and better guests, because obviously people go, they want to look you up, see your reviews, make sure that people actually like what you're doing. And sure, download numbers are always nice, but so are kind words as well. So again, if you enjoyed the podcast, if it delivered some value, take a moment, give us a rating. If you want to write a couple of words, that would be awesome too. And I want to try and start reading those on the podcast. So if you do write something, we'll definitely share it on air. And who knows, maybe we'll find something in the RageWorks prize closet and send it your way. All right. This has been the last Toys and Tech of the Trade of 2021. We will see you guys in the new year. Wishing you and your families a happy, prosperous, and healthy new year. Hopefully 2022 will be better for all of us, regardless of our circumstances. Things can always be better. and they can sure as hell be worse. Thank you guys for your support. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next one. Peace. Toys and Tech of the Trade is part of the RageWorks podcast network, your source for rants about gaming, entertainment, and the works. Visit us at RageWorksNetwork.com.